Tehuti Ma'at. That means I'm offering you truth. Welcome to Taboos. I am your hostess, Senetem As Nefaka Heteru, aka Nef, and I want to welcome you to today's episode of Taboos. If it's your first time here, welcome. Taboos is a series where we go into having deep dive conversations, but really anchored in ancient African sacred science to allow us to actually unpack the topics and things that usually are left in the shadows, or conversations and topics that aren't necessarily held at the forefront, especially when it comes to modern society. So, we are going to dive into the topic of polyamory, polygamy, and monogamy today because of where we left off in last Strong's episode. We I mentioned that we would have this conversation today. So this isn't going to be the end all be all. Obviously, all of these conversations are usually things that we have to return back to. They're multi-layered. There's a lot of nuance to the conversation. So I do invite you, if you are here with us live, to engage in the chat. You can also join the conversation if you'd like. So a little bit later on in the stream, I will drop the link. And today's conversation is going to just scratch the surface a little bit of some of the aspects of this topic that we need to talk about. Okay. If you are returning, welcome back. Thank you for being here. For those who are new, I am a sacred wisdom keeper of ancient African sacred science, also known as Kemetic science. The particular, what most people know as ancient Egyptian sacred science. And a lot of the topics that we have are really an opportunity for me to share different ancestral principles and ways that we need to orient ourselves in order to have a more balanced, holistic perspective that can be solution oriented. So, the topic at hand, multiple mates or monogamy. I posed it as a question, but really it's not really a question, because if you haven't watched previous episodes, please go back and watch the other episodes in the series, because we've basically been building on different aspects of ancient wisdom, and the different topics that we've covered thus far allowed us the opportunity to kind of lay the foundation on different ways of centering ourselves in a more cosmic worldview or an African worldview. So, one of those principles that we talk about on a regular basis is that African or cosmic consciousness is all about holistic thinking, meaning merging the polarities or the opposites, right? The complementary balance of the logic and intuition. So it's moving out of either or thinking and moving into both and. So it's not either or multiple mates or monogamy. It's really, how are we looking at this within the context of Ma'at, right? Ma'at being the scales of justice, the scales of truth. So the only way for us to have an honest conversation about it is we have to look at both sides and have a conversation that's not rooted in personal bias, but really allows us to unpack what this topic even reflects to us about ourselves based on the feelings and emotions that it evokes, but also what it says about our society. So, the sociology of the society we find ourselves in. Obviously, this is a conversation that we're speaking on. We're going to try to touch on it as broadly as possible, but usually the topic is going to be based on, different cultures, and depending on where you are, there's different norms in different parts of the world and different traditions. So it is important to recognize that we're going to try to have it as holistic as possible. Only you can choose what's best for you, right? But the goal of the way that we're going to approach the conversation is to make sure that you are being honest with yourself, and that you are aware of the emotions that are in the shadows as far as this topic is concerned. Because on either side, it tends to fluctuate, and it's really based on our personal experiences and interactions, and our sense of security and safety. So, based on our experiences, it could go either way, right? Some people may feel that it's safer to go into a situation that is polyamorous, for example. And let me go ahead and define these topics before we go any deeper. I think that that's really important. So, polyamory is the practice, and I'm just pulling off what's online, right? Polyamory is the practice of or desire for intimate relationships with more than one partner, with the knowledge of all partners, right? So everyone informed. So it's consensual, ethical, and responsible non-monogamy. Monogamy, as most people know, is having one intimate partner, one mate. And thus polyamory is having multiple mates. And speaking of that being those being intimate connections and intimate relationships, not just friendships, right? And when we're dealing with polygamy, which I think is also important for us to define, because some people have different interpretations of what polygamy is. Polygamy is the practice of marrying multiple spouses. So, because marriage is a legal construct, again, depending on where you're located, that may be legal or not, which already imposes a stigma onto it based on the culture that you're looking at it from. So, when a man is married to more than one wife at the same time, it's called polygamy. When a woman is married to more than one husband at a time, it's called polyandry. Okay? So that's what we're talking about today. Monogamy or having multiple mates. Because whether we're looking at polyamory, which is more to me in the context of like dating and exploring relationships, yes, they might still be intimate relationships, but they're not a committed legal status. Whereas polygamy is actually having multiple spouses, right? So you're dealing with making a commitment and having a legal contract and commitment to multiple partners. And I think that people usually conflate the two and sometimes are talking about polyamory and using the word polygamy, because there's a lot of people who feel that having multiple partners is the solution to a lot of our problems and or their problems. And really what they want is multiple partners, not necessarily multiple commitments or committed relationships, marriage, right? That's completely taking it to another level. So I want to welcome those who are here with us live. Please feel free to engage in the chat. That's the benefit of you being here with us live. Shout out to Sister Simone. Always glad to have you in the house. Can you confirm to me also that you can hear me fine? Because I am traveling right now. So I'm on that international Wi-Fi that's usually a little off, but this seems really stable. And then I'm also in a space where I'm controlling my volume. So I just want to make sure you can hear me clear. So just let me know. And okay, I want us to be able to dive in because there's a couple layers of the conversation that I think are important. If you are here with us live, I would love to hear your perspective on what you think is an aspect of this conversation or this topic that interests you. Great. Glad you could hear me loud and clear. Give thanks. So I would love to know what aspect of the conversation you feel drawn to or passionate about or have curiosity around, whatever it may be, because there's so many layers to it. So in our conversation today, I imagine that we're not going to be able to touch on every single aspect. But again, these conversations are ongoing. So as we progress through each time we have the conversation, we'll unpack things as they come up. So when we talk about monogamy, right, as a way of being, sometimes I notice people argue that we're not made to be monogamous. And I think that I don't really know if there's a need for us to make arguments as much as there is a need for us to be clear on what it is that we personally need and choose and knowing that we have the sovereignty to create that reality with consensual, obviously if everything's consensual. I think there's a difference between cheating and having multiple partners when everyone is not informed and does not have knowledge of what's going on, and a difference when we see, a situation where, there's infidelity and someone sneaking around. So I think that that's one of the reasons that people think that this is a solution to that, because there's almost a lack of accountability around the character dynamic of infidelity. And I think that that piece is something that's really a delicate conversation, because most people have been cheated on and most people have been cheaters. So it is something that speaks on our character. And because it's also something that can cause shame and guilt, it's one of those things that we're going to move into slowly, because it's important to be aware of those emotions, because those are the most subtle, sticky emotions that exist. Okay? They don't feel good, and usually we really suppress them so much that we don't even recognize them when they're there. And they do a really great job of hiding in the cracks and finding any little shadow space to exist in. So first thing is, you got to be aware of where is your perspective coming from, and know that without judgment of yourself or without concern of the judgment of others, you have to be honest with yourself, because that's where character begins. It's about the integrity, what's in your heart. We talked about Ma'at being balanced and the two sides of the scales coming together to be whole. And the reason why we use that as the symbol for truth and reciprocity and morality is because it was symbolizing a weighing ceremony, right? Where the heart is weighed against the feather of truth, the feather of Ma'at, the ostrich feather. And the point was for you to be in integrity and to be in truth was your heart was light, because you were moving in integrity and you were moving honestly. But the first place is we have to be honest with ourselves before we can be honest with anyone else about what we want and what we need. We have to be clear about that. And I think that because so many people are not honest with themselves and clear about that, that instead it creates a dynamic where we end up moving out of character, out of integrity, and keeping secrets and experiencing infidelity or hiding, having multiple partners with the illusion, right? Being inauthentic in the expression of the monogamy, because we have a single commitment to a person, but because of our own sexual energy and whatever's going on with us, we're not able to be in integrity with the commitment that we've made to that person. Because obviously if we were, then it wouldn't need to be a secret, right? Then everyone would be consenting to the fact of the matter. And usually there's a lot of fear in there too. That's another one of the emotions that is important to examine and to illuminate and shine a light on, because there's usually a fear of losing the other partner if you are honest about wanting to have another partner. And the thing is, it's better to form that relationship with ourselves internally before trying to have that conversation with the partner that you are committed to. Because if you're able to be clear about what your intentions are with yourself and have a clear and open heart about what it is that you desire, then you can approach that conversation not expecting the worst, which is usually what happens and why people just, obviously there's so many different ways that a situation of infidelity can occur. Like, it's not always premeditated, which is why it's important to have that relationship with self, because when you have that relationship with yourself, then you're more aware and conscious of your own desires. And when that temptation comes up, you're able to navigate those spaces more, because there's no shortage of temptation. There's so many people out here. There are billions of us walking the planet. And on top of that, we're constantly being sexually stimulated. So I think the other topics that we've talked about before we even got to this point is very important, because when we're dealing with the over sexualization, right, this hypersexuality, and then we're dealing with the suppression of so much sexual trauma and sexual abuse, and the sexual desires that are being expressed and that we're conjuring are really, or being conjured in us, are sometimes coming from really trauma responses and things that can be unhealthy, in the context of how we choose to engage sexually. Because when we think about the ramifications of the act itself, right, or the potential of sexual disease, sexually transmitted disease, pregnancy, and really further enmeshment. And that we touched on those topics in a lot more depth in previous episodes. That's why I keep saying, please watch the previous episodes, because this can't be a one-off conversation, because all the other things that we've talked about before, even the conversation that we had about angels and demons and what does it mean to be possessed, all of that is relevant, because you can also be possessed by an urge, or that's in a way that it can express itself. So I think that one of the things that I noticed when the topic of polygamy comes up often is it's usually one-sided, because the conversation is usually talking about or leaving out polyandry, and meaning it's more normalized to look at having multiple wives than it is having multiple husbands. That's a more rare occurrence, and there's many reasons why that may be. We can think about the reality of having more women present than men, creating a dynamic where it may be necessary to pair off more women per man, and I think that that's a valid point to be made. And I think a lot of the points that are to be made on both sides need to not be outright dismissed. Usually that happens because of our emotional attachment to the conversation and how we personally feel. So I want to allow us to just release your preconceived notions and your own personal thoughts in the moment. We will open up the conversation for that. But just actually process the validity on both sides, right? Because I'm not going to say we are made to be with one partner only. But the point is, each of us is here on a unique journey, and we have to be clear on what is best for us. And then we can look at the choices that we make. We also have to be accountable to our collective responsibility, in addition to our personal accountability, right? So how are the choices that we make, how do those reflect, and how does that multiply at large if that then becomes a value paradigm for the society at large, right? So there are certain traditions that do encourage, and it's a normal practice to have polygamy. And, in certain places, like in the divided states, it's illegal there to have, well, I think in most states, I think some states may have, it is legal in some states to have multiple spouses. So that's one thing to take into consideration, is what is the acceptability of it? And even before that, why? Why do people desire to have multiple partners? Is it a genuine desire to take care of and make sure that there are less broken homes and to strengthen and come together? Or is there something else behind it? And I find that in most cases, yes, there is something else behind it, because we're also dealing with the continuum of what we're in, right? We didn't just get here right now today and now it's off and running down the track. We're continuing what was before us. So the cultural reality that we inherited is part of what we're expressing right now. So because there's a cultural paradigm that has, because I, to put it plain, I feel like a lot of people just want to be pimps and players and have multiple women, but not necessarily make a commitment to establishing an actual family dynamic and making a commitment to multiple women. And even when that is the case, it's very important to bring into that conversation. And the reason why I'm having that one-sided perspective on it is because, again, the conversation is lopsided and it's not balanced. We don't usually talk about women having multiple husbands in the same way. So the conversation is usually spearheaded by males who are interested in convincing everyone that this is the best thing for us. And I'm not saying that it's not, but what I am saying is there's a reason why. And a lot of that reason why is really about the sexual state of being, not necessarily the societal well-being that is projected out. Okay. So if that were the case, I feel there would be more commitments made, serious commitments. If you're serious about that, then maybe you would need to move to a state where that's legal instead of creating a dynamic where, it's something that technically really is putting you in danger. And again, we are sovereign beings, so I'm not saying that we have to, everyone crosses the street without a crosswalk. We're not all following the laws, and nor does everyone agree with the, phony state that is imposed on us, and that is the governing body in most places, right? A lot of people are not, really respectful of the law. And I understand that. But even within that, it's about the seriousness, right? Like, how serious are we about building multiple families? And is it a situation where we're actually just not aware of why our sexual energy is so overstimulated and how to value it as a power source? And I think that conversation is usually tipped in the opposite direction, where it's usually emphasized for women to value their sexual energy and to value their power and to know the power of their sexuality and their sexual energy, and not as much for men. And that's very dangerous because we equally have this sexual power. It's equally the power source for both males and females. It doesn't matter what sex you are. You're just operating in one of the polarities. And that's if you come out with full-on male reproductive organs and sexual organs and full-on female sexual organs and reproductive organs. And I think we touched on in some other episodes as well to deal with the dynamic of the hormones and the chemicals and all of the different things that are interrupting our natural process already, right? So there's so many layers, not just the programming and the socializing. There's very physical, chemical, biological transformation, like mutations and modifications that are being orchestrated in a lot of ways intentionally. So it's not that this information is not known. The fact that damn near every chemical, synthetic, artificial chemical on the market disrupts the endocrine system and affects the body's reproductive system and the reproductive organs and the sexual functioning is not a coincidence. Okay. So I believe we touched on it in some other episodes. We will go deeper into that in some of the future episodes also. But it's important for men to also know that their sexual energy is very powerful, because I think women prey on men a lot, very unconsciously most of the time, because of the way our boys are socialized to even be proud of pedophilia in the case of boys, where if a boy is at a young age, it's actually seen as a rite of passage and something to be proud of if they engage in a sexual act with an older woman. Never mind when we're dealing with sexual abuse and things that are not consensual, where the child is being exposed to sexual acts or even forced to perform or engage in sexual acts with males or females. So, because the way that the boys and the men are socialized, they don't usually have the same space to process and deal with that sexual wounding. So, to me, that's a clear indication of where that imbalance mirrors in the sexual desire. Now, yes, there's a biological aspect of the differences between testosterone and estrogen, and those are just two of the main hormones. There's other hormones involved in our biochemistry, but there is a reality of the difference between male and female energy, or masculine and feminine energy overall, right? Again, reminder that when I say that, we all have both masculine and feminine energy within us, but we're dealing with the sexual aspect of it. So the actual physiological aspect of sex, right? So male and female. But when we're talking about it energetically and we say that masculine energy is active and feminine energy is receptive, we see that represented in the reproductive organs, right? Or the sexual organs, because the male energy is going to be more active. And the male energy is also, when you think about the production of sperm, it's more consistent and it's active energy. So it's externalized, whereas the female energy is internalized and feminine energy is receptive and it pulls in. So the feminine reproductive system or sexual organs receive. So all of that does speak to a dynamic that creates a different level of sexual stimulus and desire and necessity, right? Even on a natural level. And I feel like sometimes we like to outright dismiss that. And that's also not appropriate either, because, yeah, it's a real thing. So if that's the reality, what do we create? What type of environment do we create? And I think the most important thing is the honesty and the integrity. So to me, something like polyamory is something that's very important. And I'm glad that people are becoming more educated about it and learning about it. Now, it's important to be honest with yourself about what your desires and boundaries are. But I think it's better to be in a situation where all parties are aware of what's going on and it's not something that's happening in secret. And that's the issue with taboo sexuality, is those things are so shunned upon that people feel that they have to hide certain things about themselves or their sexual practices or desires that they keep in the shadows, and then they're putting other people in danger by not allowing them to even know and consent. Because whether we're dealing with it physically or spiritually, you're putting someone in a position that they're not choosing to put themselves in, right? If they don't want to intertwine their energy with someone else's energy, if they don't want to put themselves at risk of sexually transmitted diseases that may be transmitted between one partner to the other. So this is exactly why it's important for us to have these conversations to begin with, because the less taboo that they are, the more we can move into ma'at, the more we can move with honesty and integrity, which is why we have to look at sex as, yes, it's the most intimate act that you can have. You're literally entering or being entered by another person, another being, another physical body. There's nothing more intimate than that. So the fact that we can remove the emotional intimacy from that is, in my opinion, unhealthy, because it's delusional to think and say that it's not intimate, because it is. Now, emotionally, depending on what lifestyle someone lives in, it may not, that may have to be repressed. Like people who engage in prostitution, sexual work as a regular practice are not going to be able to emotionally process the entanglement, right? And I know that word got corrupted by Jada Pinkett Smith, but yeah, that intertwining is very real. And in order to function and have sex with multiple partners on a consistent basis, routinely, um, as a business transaction, it wouldn't be possible to hold consciously and carry all of that and still engage in the act. But in most cases and interviews and all the different information that has come out about it, it's still there, right? It's just deeply repressed or suppressed. So I think that that's another element to think about, is making sure that everybody, if we have the space and the place to explore that, instead of feeling like everyone needs to be monogamous and everyone agrees to monogamy and shunning upon that, if we allow people to express their actual desires and be honest about that, that's a very mature way to develop sexually as a society. So I think that that's a healthy path that we're on. The thing about polygamy that I think is also respectable is the fact that there's commitment there. And that's an honorable thing, because if the person is making a commitment to each partner, that shows a level of seriousness. And it's honorable because through that commitment, there's a responsibility that's shared there, and there's accountability that's shared there. And again, it's consensual and informed. So there's not secret things happening that different people don't know about, which I think is where the integrity and the character is jeopardized. So I wanted to say that when we think about looking at our original nature and questioning whether or not it's part of our original nature, then that's something that I feel like is something that has to be explored more deeply, because there are a lot of traditional or indigenous traditions that have multiple mates as part of the construct of the tradition. And I think the context of the polygamy is important, because when we look at certain traditions that have come from, for example, Western religions that are patriarchal, then you can't separate that from the traditions that are birthed from that culture or from that religious context, right? So that's a big thing, because the major Western religions are patriarchal. And that means it would only be right to see the exploitative aspect of the dynamics between males and females in a patriarchal context, right? In ancient African traditions and in some indigenous traditions, you see the position of the woman more elevated and balanced, right? You have matrilineal systems, matrifocal systems, and matriarchal systems, which are three different things, right? So we'll just talk about like the matrifocal system means the line is focused on, or the progression of the line, the even like in Kemet, for example, right? The line of royalty comes through the womb, right? Through the mother. And in, as opposed to in patriarchal systems where the line comes down from the father, right? You take your father's last name. So that's matrifocal. It uplifts the woman in the womb in the position of mother. However, it's balanced with the male father principle. Whereas a matriarchal system would uplift the woman above the man, which is a different thing, right? Like things like modern feminism kind of embody more of that. But we're talking about Ma'at, having a balance between the male and female energy and just seeing how both serve a role and a purpose. So if we're dealing with Ma'at, the way to have ultimate balance and embody that is male and female, and that being balanced. And I see the requirement of, or how much that requires discipline as the biggest obstruction that people have to monogamy. And I think it's because it becomes a strict view that this is how it has to be. And that's not the case. I think that people have to naturally arrive at that honestly and want to be disciplined and committed in that sense. And when or if that changes, there needs to be the fluidity and the space for that, because otherwise it creates such a strict container that to me creates resistance, right? You want to rebel against something that's pressuring you. It's part of the natural cause and effect, right? It's just, if something is going to push against you, you're going to push back. So I do think that having the openness and not making it something that is taboo or something that is judged harshly by the social order is something that would help to allow people to naturally arrive at it, if that's the direction that we're going in general, which I feel is the direction that the planet and humanity is going into, a healing process to come into a more balanced place. But that doesn't mean that the other ends of the spectrum don't have their place and are not necessary. That's for each person to choose. Remember, Ma'at is a moral inventory you do on yourself. So if what you choose is to have multiple mates, you may find other people who want multiple mates, and that is in Ma'at, because that's what people are agreeing to in that context. The thing that I think we need to be careful with is when people want to so-called have their cake and eat it too, because that's not in Ma'at and it's not reciprocal. And if you don't want to allow your mate, your partner, to have other mates or partners, but you want to be able to, then to me that creates an imbalance in the power dynamic there, right? Because when we're dealing with our sexual energy, we're dealing with a power source. We're dealing with the question of power, right? There's no way to remove that. So especially when sex becomes transactional, it's just more of a clear and open expression of the transactional nature of that power dynamic. So it's not something to be judged, because at the very least, at least it's clear. And it's not something that's being hidden behind games and all these other psychological mind tricks and things that happen within dating and relationships, where it's not just completely out there, like, here's what's happening, right? There's always going to be a exchange of energy. At the very least, we should be striving to have a balanced or reciprocal exchange of energy. To me, that's really what we need to be looking at. So that's why I don't think it's like either or, because if you choose whatever you choose, just keep it balanced and work with people that are there. Don't try to create a dynamic where you have multiple mates with someone who wants to be monogamous and that you're saying you're monogamous with and making that commitment to, if that's not what, if you don't have the discipline to do that. You got to be honest with yourself and unattached. I think the codependent relationships and attachments that exist within those relationship dynamics create a pool, like in the environment to fester infidelity and dishonesty and create, just a lie, a false narrative. right? For people to then have to wear a mask and, all the things that happen within that space. So I think that it's important to be conscious of our desires. So I think that that part is very important, being conscious of what it is that we desire and asking ourselves why and going deep into the layers of the why, right? Because some of the things that we talked about in previous episodes, again, are very important, dealing with sexual wounding, sexual trauma, sexual abuse, dealing with ancestral trauma around the rape and the breeding that was happening, especially during the enslavement of our ancestors. During the Ma'afa, we had a lot of breeding camps, which also created a dynamic where the actual life force and creative force of sexual energy was exploited, right? Because if someone had a human farm, essentially, right, where their plantation, they're like literally breeding people to enslave, and it's done through incest, and then that incest is then recycled as unhealed trauma, and we're having people within the family having exploitative sexual relationships and dynamics. That's a big thing, and it's a common thing, and it's just taboo. It's not spoken about. So it's one of those things we're going to be illuminating more, because we can't separate one from the other. So when we're having this conversation, it is a reflection of that. Some of us are wounded in seeing our parents even go through divorce or infidelity or all the things that come around this topic, if it's not personal to us. And that's what I'm saying. Like, it could be personal. You could observe it and that make you afraid and not want to deal with it. So maybe you might really want to be in a monogamous relationship and know that's what you want, but you don't want to get cheated on and you don't want to deal with the betrayal. So you say that you're open to having multiple partners, or your partner having multiple partners, but it's not something that really sits right with your heart. Those are the different dynamics that I'm saying can occur if we're not able to do that inner work and really find wholeness through that healing that has to happen within, which really just happens through honesty and exploration and allowing ourselves to process the emotions that come with all of these different dynamics and experiences that we've had. We have to feel our feelings, right? That's the nature of anything being taboo, put in the shadows, is you don't deal with it, you suppress it. And then, as I said in the episode we did with about possession, the other energies can then tether themselves to those things that you're trying to keep suppressed because you don't want to feel them. And every time it triggers or resurfaces to be felt, you go deeper and sink deeper like quicksand into those energies. So I wanted to just check in on the chat. I am going to go ahead and let me go ahead and put in here if anyone wants to join. If you want to join the conversation and actually come into the studio, if no one joins, I'll probably wrap up. I know we could talk a little bit more. Oops. Okay. No, we could talk a little bit more about it, but I've been traveling all day. I'm actually really exhausted, but I would love to engage if anyone else, because like all this traveling, I'm so tired. My mind can barely even think to go deeper into the layers that I intended to. But again, it's an ongoing conversation, so we'll continue on. These types of relationships sounds like they require a lot of maturity. That is such an important point, Sister Simone. They do require a lot of maturity. And that's why I think in the last episode we had talked about, I think actually Isis, shout out to Isis, blessings, sis. I think Isis in last Tuesday's episode was the one who said, like, I really think that we're being, it's something that sounds good, but people aren't ready for it. And I think that that's very true, because when you think about the level of maturity that it would take. And I've seen people like who exhibit that level of maturity in polyamorous relationships. Jadena, I believe that's how you pronounce his name, the rapper, or the artist. I don't know what else he does. I know he does other things, but he had done an interview, I think it was with Sway in the Morning on that show. And he was talking about, see if I could put the link in the description, but he was talking about being polyamorous for a number of years, being in a relationship now, monogamous with one of the women that he was in a polyamorous relationship with. And he elaborates on like all the different layers of that dynamic. And I was like, wow, that is beautiful and very mature, because they create documents to their agreements. And, you know, like it gets very detailed, like, okay, if I'm with another partner, here's what this other partner is agreeing to before engaging in partnership with me. I think that that level of transparency and maturity can only really be carried by people who really are whole in themselves and creating interdependent relationships that are not attachments to other people because of things that we're not feeling within ourselves. So that does come back to the core. If we want to have the maturity that's necessary to have, for example, if I wanted to have a sister wife, the type of relationship I would need to have with a sister wife to share a husband with another woman, we would have to have a very strong and healthy sistership. And that is one of the things that I think is very difficult for a lot of people. And that's not even including a husband in the middle. Never mind when you put a man in the middle of that equation, that don't sound easy. So I think a lot of these things have to be dealt with in a more practical way. Like we have to really think, what would it take for multiple men to share a woman, or multiple women to share a man? What type of emotional dynamics have to be there? Each person has to be very secure within themselves to exhibit that level of maturity. And yeah, unfortunately, with the way I've been seeing things, I don't think that is very few and far between people who actually have that level of emotional stability, never mind maturity, right? So again, I think it's important to examine, right, when it comes to partnering with others, what it is that we're reflecting. That's what's being reflected externally that's happening internally. So again, I always guide us all back within, right? So it's important to take that journey within, to make sure that you're clear on what is my relationship to my sexual energy, what is my awareness of my sexual energy, how am I connecting with other people, where is the connection point tethered to other experiences, whether it's from the past or whether it's things that you may not even be conscious of in this life, right? Because there's so many dimensions and layers to our continuous existence, right, in eternity. So when we place ourselves here and now in this moment, there's sometimes things that we can't even explain or understand, but sometimes you have to just feel it in your heart. That comes back to Ma'at. You have to feel it in your heart what is right for you. It's not about anything being right or wrong. What is right for you right now? Because that may also change. So if we are strong in our own hearts, we'll be able to communicate, right? The Tehuti is the balance to the Ma'at. Communicate that truth and that honesty with confidence in order to attract and align with the people who can meet us where we are, and not be so attached to them that we can't shift when we're not there anymore, or when they're not there anymore and we're not meeting at the same place anymore, and have amicable departures in relationships, right? Separations that are amicable. And again, that's another topic. Maybe we'll have to talk about this next Tuesday, is separation as a taboo. people feeling like they have to keep together relationships or keep together marriages because of how taboo it is to separate. And again, that's a conversation that's two-sided because on the other side of separation is connection, right? And unity. And you can't have one without the other. So that's a deeper conversation that we can go into. But is there any other comments, questions, or anything that anyone who's here with us live wants to express? Please go ahead and put it in the chat. I'll give you some time to go ahead and do that. I do want to invite people who are here with us, if you're interested in contacting us, Tehuti Ma'at, about anything in regards to the topics that we talk about in regards to our community services. I don't even think I shared with those who may not know what Tehuti Ma'at is. If it's your first time here, Tehuti Ma'at is a grassroots cooperative institution. We are what I call a revolutionary instrument. I am the proud mother of this instrument, and we function as a resource mechanism to foster the political, economic, and social empowerment of people of African descent. So that's through all spectrums of the work that we do. So we focus primarily on building and developing institutions in the areas of healing, art, and education. So if you want to learn more about Tehuti Ma'at, you can visit tehutimaat.org. So pretty much what we do is we create cooperatives. So we're creatives coming together to build revolutionary cooperatives that focus on the upliftment of people of African descent. And one of our cooperatives is Coins and Karis. So I do also want to invite you, if you want to work with me, if you would love to do spiritual coaching or any consulting, we have also other services on there. Like our sister Danny also does astrological consultations. If you're interested in an oracle reading with me, as well as the spiritual goods and services that we offer, you can visit coinsandkaris.com. As I said, it's a cooperative space, so it's one of our cooperative business ventures in order to fund the revolutionary work that we're doing, so the community service-based work. So one of the initiatives that birthed Coins and Karis is our healing ciphers. So they started off as our sacred womb circles, and that was back in like 2016, 2015. And naturally it's developed into what we call now our Intuit healing cipher. Intuit meaning literally intuit, like the intuition, right? We use the word intuit as an action word because it's our space where we do ritual therapy. So it's a sacred space for us to come together and really unpack and really explore the depths of the things that we're experiencing and going through. And every month we have an Intuit healing cipher. And if you join Tehuti Ma'at as a member, you can join the militia. I put, and all the links are in the description, but you can join at tehutimaat.org/join at any rank of the militia. And by joining, you get access to the ARC, which stands for the African Rehabilitation Center. This is also known as the Amos Wilson Collective. It's our collaboration with the African War College, and our goal as a collective is to create this virtual community space to further engage the practical work that we're doing on the ground. So that space is a virtual space where we have our healing ciphers, our community connects, and our warrior workouts each month. And by joining, you get access to the virtual, the private server, and you get to be a part of all the different chat channels, as well as participate in those member-only gatherings. So if it's something you're interested in, then feel free to join. Again, if you have any questions about it, you can contact us at grow@tehutimaat.org, or you can text 646-883-MAAT. Okay, so I want to thank you all for being here. I do want to uplift Sister Isis's message here. Yes, being in a poly relationship really has illuminated the areas of healing I have to nurture. Yeah. And I'm glad that you can be honest about that too, because it's important that when that's illuminated to see it, right? Because all of our relationships are illuminating something in us, even if they're monogamous. And sometimes when they're monogamous, it can be harder to look away because it's one mirror. And when there's multiple mirrors, then sometimes you want to look at this mirror, sometimes you could just look at that mirror. And it creates a different dynamic, right? But it's all reflecting us. And no matter what we choose, we're choosing what we're supposed to choose. We're choosing what's right for us to experience because it's what you chose. So it's what on a soul level you need to experience, right? So that means whatever choices that you make are going to attract the circumstances, situations, and experiences that allow your soul to develop and grow. And that's what we're all here for. So give thanks. And things were easy when we spoke about them in theory, like what our boundaries are and commitments we had to others. Then, when putting it into practice and bringing others into our relationship, things shifted and we had to readjust those boundaries. Yeah, and that's the other thing about relationships that I think is really important for people to think about is the fact that they're living, breathing things. Everybody who's in the relationship is a living, breathing, growing person or being. Like you're not always going to be where you are right now, and that's fine, right? We always say the only constant is change. So if change is the only constant, then we have to be adaptable. And it requires for us to not be attached to certain things. So when we think about a lot of the energies that we're moving through that are these like revolutionary energies that are coming through with winds and the air, right? The wind that comes and changes and shifts the energy, right? That Uranian energy, or what we call shu, shu, the energy of literally the air, the atmosphere. It's one of change. So when we're dealing with a lot of those energies, which we are right now as a collective on this planet, it's to detach us from any boxes and parameters and things that we feel are norms for us. And depending on your soul's expression in this life, it's experiencing whatever it needs to free itself from. So some people are freeing themselves from monogamy from a past life. Some people are freeing themselves from polyamory from a past life. It just depends what you're experiencing and why. All of us are expanding. So it we can't all be at the same place, right? So that's the other part of being able to have these taboo conversations, making sure that we're always coming from a place of ma'at, which is inner moral inventory on the self, not projecting that outward and pointing the finger and judging other people. You only know what's best for you because you don't know anyone else's experience. You don't know the full spectrum of what they have experienced or are experiencing in order to cast a judgment. And judgment has to be done when you can hold the full truth, both sides of the scale, right? So thank you for opening up and sharing about that, Isis, and also Sister Simone for your comment on the maturity. Anyone else who's here watching with us live, thank you for being here. And if you're catching the replay or the raw play, as I like to say, then thank you also for being here. And I want to go ahead and ask you if you are enjoying the content and if you like what we're doing here or what this conversation was, please feel free to share it with other people. So I want to just do some housekeeping and let people know that you can support the channel by donating to our Cash App to support the work that we're doing here. So you can Cash App $ Tehuti Ma'at World to support the live stream that we're doing here. Everything supports. So please feel free to support the channel and the conversations and the work that we're doing here. And I look forward to seeing you next Tuesday. So I'm gonna go get some rest. And I hope everyone has a beautiful rest of the night. Travel light. All right, power.